Welcome back guys to What If Ainz Guildmates Transfer to New World Part 10. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications by hitting the bell icon, like and share this video. Let's get started. Chapter 16. The world of 2138 was a bleak one. Many had lost hope for the future with one look at the decrepit world they found themselves in. Smog covered the majority of the world, making the air practically unbreathable, and any spots that were clear of contaminants were seen as luxury tourist traps, and cost so much that an average person would not be able to go there in their lives. The majority of the population sought to alleviate this despair by losing themselves in MMORPGs and other virtual escapes. This, however, was a way for corporations to keep everyone in check. By providing ways to enjoy themselves, they could cause the masses to feel comfortable with their predicament. As long as I have this, I'll be fine, and so on were the types of things they longed to hear. Others who did not engage in these activities choose to lose themselves in work, with the false promise of rising higher in the corporate ladder to have a better life than the one they lead. This was the other way they kept the world in their grip. The cogs in the machine would keep turning if they had sufficient motivation. A carrot and stick. These were the two archetypes you would tend to find in this now destroyed world. Those who would strive to escape their bleak future through games, and those who would try in vain to escape that future, reaching for a goal they would never attain. Indeed, this was how the people of Earth would spend their short lives. Some would try to hide from reality, and some would give their best to serve. And others, that one's going in my favorites, would utterly waste them. Let me just save that one. Let's see. 267,296, alright, done. This man, known to his confidants as Sino, had just finished what he would call living. While in the future, pornography was still a market, it had somewhat stagnated due to it shifting toward virtual reality. Many would agree that this was worse than the old manual way of doing it, as touch had not been well developed for VR yet, and in the end, not much would be felt for the recipient. As such, men of culture, such as himself, would scour the internet in search of old relics that had been left behind. While they were still being made today, the sheer number of them meant that valuable masterpieces had been lost to time, and it was people like him who sought to find them for himself. Be it H-games or in a manga, he thoroughly enjoyed the hunt. Well, now that that's done, what should I do for the rest of the day? Sino was somebody who liked to deal with things as they came his way, and rarely planned ahead, so his daily life reflected that, essentially acting on whatever his desires wanted at that moment. So he often hopped from one thing to another. Maybe you could actually be useful to society for once, Oni-chan. The childish voice that had said this cutting remark was a girl who inhabited the same house as him, something rarely seen with his kind. This girl was known to the masses as Kazuya Mikumi, an extremely popular voice actress for a variety of anime-related things, and would also happen to be the older sister of the man. You're one to talk. Your voice some of these things, why criticize me for enjoying them, huh? Because what I do is actually a job, and what you do in sink further and further into degeneracy. I really don't even know how you're making money off that. Sino would often blog about some of the treasures he found on popular sites that were filled with similar people to himself. While he did make a small amount of money from donations, he also worked as a translator for such works. Therefore he oftentimes had an ample amount of money on hand, since his needs were relatively low. Hey, just because I can appreciate the finer things and you can't doesn't make me any less of a human. You sure? Honestly, just keep your habits in your den of degeneracy and keep it away from me. Yeah. Seeing that he had his fill for the day, he went downstairs to enjoy himself in some other way. While he had some ideas, nothing seemed to be truly appealing. While he may ask Kaze for ideas, he would most likely get a sarcastic comment in response, so he held his tongue. Welp, time for old reliable, go to VR and scroll through until I find something better to do. While he rarely played games, his headset was filled with every visual novel imaginable. He would usually play one, then proceed to not shut up about it for a week, bugging his sister with his newest waifu, and then get bored after seeing a new one. And thus, the cycle would repeat. As he began to flip through the library of literature, his sister had interrupted his session. What do you think you're doing? I was planning on using that, you know. Don't you have your own? Why bug me about this now? Because mine is getting repaired after what you did earlier. So suck it up and give it. What she was alluding to was what happened a week ago. During one of their scuffles, she had asked him to grab her purse which was near him, and in response, he had haphazardly thrown it to her, which he claims she could have caught easily. It, however, hit the table behind her, which her VR set was resting on, which had caused its ruin. And both sides continue to argue on whose fault it was. I think you mean what you did. Don't blame me because you can't catch something to save your life. As he began to drown out her uproar of comebacks, he had noticed a very familiar icon hidden within his stash. Yggdrasil? How is that here? From what he remembered, it had shut down roughly 2 years ago. If so, was this a second version? While it was hardly rare for popular games to get sequels, they would not come out this frequently. Then if that wasn't the case, what was it? I hope it is. And besides, once I'm in, she can't argue with me anymore, cause I'll already be using it. Huh? His course set, he made to open the DMMO and enjoy the rest of his day. And at the same time, his sister had grabbed the helmet away from him to end the argument then and there. Really a useless brother like you should just list. And then, darkness came over him. Alright then, let's get this started. As an avid player of Yggdrasil early on, Pararon was quite excited to have a new version out for him to play. A game where you can only become strong through trial and error always is an exciting thing. You would either improvise, or you would falter. And the race always thrilled him. Now then, where is, hold on, what? As he went to go to the start menu, he realized that he was already put into the game, and not only that, but he also was in his old character's avatar. Which could only mean that this wasn't a new version. But if so, then why was he already in the game? That's pretty weird, but not only that, this doesn't look like a starting area. What is this place? As far as the eye could see, there was nothing alive on this mountain of rubble and ash. Skeletons of various animals and humans littered the ground, while dust blew in the wind, as if to show the fate of all that enter this place. It was barren of anything that possessed life, even plants would not grow here. Pararon did not know this, but this place was known as the Mountain of the Dead, a place that even adamantite adventurers feared to travel near. All who entered this place were said to perish and would never be seen again. Some believed it to be a curse. Others thought it was mere superstition. Only a few select individuals knew the truth about this place, and they would rightfully fear it. Indeed, for this was the home of a world-shaking calamity. This is probably a trick from those shitty devs. What is having people spawn in a random area of the world their idea of exploring now? Wow, they really are shitty, aren't they? All games would have you spawn in a hub, or at least a low-leveled area to get your bearings, but it would seem that Yggdrasil's devs were more unforgiving than he remembered. He honestly never thought they would go this far. Is this supposed to be a punishment to experienced plays? Like, you know how to play, so try and find your way out? That's so unfair. Assuming that he was now level 1, since the game had shut down, it would be far too unfair to have him thrown in areas that were likely to have high-level enemies or inhospitable environments with dangerous effects. And it would seem he had landed in an area that had met both of those requirements. As he was considering if he should just respawn and try to land somewhere better, the ground beneath him began to shake, and boulders that were resting on the incline above him started to roll down, creating an avalanche or rubble. It would seem that the cause was a pile of rocks that he had noticed slowly growing in size and crumpling with each new bit of elevation. Just as it reached its peak, an explosion of rubble showered the surrounding area with shredded rock, and the figure hiding under it had made itself known, wings outstretched. At first glance, one might be forgiven for thinking that it was a skeletal dragon, a dangerous threat in its own right, but comparing a mere pile of bones to this monstrosity would be a most foolish course of action. A black fog covered most of its body, sparkling like the night sky, and it seemed to be taking the form of the dragon's scales, as it covered the entire top of its body, leaving only the stomach and bottoms of the legs to show off its bony carapace. 2 green eyes glowed with a roaring hot malice, seemingly lit by a flame that not even the coldest of waters could put out. Its wings were also made of bone, but a ethereal, purple substance, presumably negative energy, served the purpose of its wing membrane, which also had the side effect of damaging any living organisms caught in the wind they picked up. A truly fiendish creation that would make one question if a god even existed to allow such a creature to exist. Guphandra Argyros. This dragon had been born in the peak of the Dragon Lord's power. While he had not been as strong as his siblings, nor did he have access to wild magic, and therefore could not even come close to the power of the dragon lords of the time. He was almost unrivaled when it came to knowledge. He learned about the world and all things that would exist within it. Not for any reason like storing power or practical use, he simply found it interesting. This was how he had chosen to live his life, but he did not regret it. The others respected his choice, as strong dragons were a dime a dozen, therefore none forced him to seek out power, and as such, he never did. That is, until the 8 Greed Kings came. With their unrelenting might, they cut a bloody swath across the world, destroying nations and species underfoot. And with their mighty artifacts and abilities, even the dragon lords were no match, and soon found themselves falling to them as well. Due to this, the dragons all decided to put their differences aside, and would team up to slay this menace that now populated their world. Save for one. As Guphandara was not powerful, the other dragons saw him as merely a hindrance, unable to fight, and with no magic, they had cast him away from the few that were left, with some even suggesting he be used as a sacrifice. With no way to defend himself, he was forced to oblige them, and had left them to their own devices, to retreat onto a lush mountaintop, where he would choose to reside for the rest of his days. But this isolation did nothing to quell the burning anger within his heart. The beings he had lived with his whole life, and some he would even dare to call friends, had cast him from his home despite not doing anything wrong. How dare they? They deserve to die. They would all die by his hand. Of course, this was seemingly impossible for one such as he, for without the primordial weapon known as wild magic, nor the artifacts of the kings, he could never even get close to one of them. However, as fate would have it, his wish may still be able to granted due to one thing. Tear magic. The one thing that he was thankful the kings had done, they had used an unknown method to bring a new type of magic into the world. Not only was it easier to learn that wild magic, but anyone could learn it, regardless of race. The more intelligent you were, and the more you knew about magic, the more likely you would reach a higher tier. And luckily for him, that was his specialty. Not only that, but the other dragons hated its existence, so it would be the ultimate irony, destroyed by the thing they shunned. However, it was a known fact that the tier magic was largely inferior to wild magic in many ways. Even the kings had to use their most powerful spells to overcome the dragon lords. Thus, he had to learn and become as strong as he could. Secluded in his cave, he practiced his spells day and night, and was able to reach the 3rd tier after very little time, but he soon hit a roadblock. While his spells were quite powerful, they were not able to reach their true potential, as he rarely studied the art of combat. However, he had learned that due to his race, a black-scaled dragon, he was able to cast negative energy magic with increased proficiency. Armed with that knowledge, he began to undergo a ritual that would allow him to become undead, and with his powerful knowledge, race, and racial abilities, he was able to become a creature of legend. One of the most powerful undead. A night lich. With his newfound power, he began to absorb the life force from every living thing on the mountain in an effort to grow stronger, be it sentient or not. The mountain's once luscious greens turned to dull browns and grays, as the world around it withered away. If anyone attempted to stop him, he would devour them too. Over the course of 300 years he would ebb away at the planet's life force, bit by bit making him stronger. If one were to rank him in terms of difficulty rating, he would be at 150 by now. With his enhanced might and collective knowledge, he managed to break the borders of the known world and create an entirely new form of magic that used brain power as opposed to magical might. This psychic magic was extremely deadly to foes who lacked defense against mental attacks, and through his mastery, even managed to reach the mythical realm of the 8th tier, where his ultimate attack resided. He was confident that nothing would be able to survive unscathed. Though this was the only spell he knew of such a high tier, even the 6th or 7th were beyond his normal abilities. And this is how he had lived, waiting for the day he felt strong enough to reach the domain of the dragon lords to make them pay for their actions. And it would seem that some new prey had entered his domain. What is that thing? Despite knowing a great deal about the world, he had never encountered a species like this one before. It appeared to be avian in appearance, yet it seemed to be wreathed in gold with pure white feathers, almost appearing divine in nature. While there were species of demi-humans that had features of birds, none came to mind that matched this one's appearance, and if his instincts were correct, it was a strong one. Wonderful. I'm certain that his life force will cause my strength to soar. How marvelous. Though he could see it was strong, it certainly wasn't at his level, and so he allowed his voice to reach the quivering lower life form. Behold, peon, you stand before the great Guphendra Argyros, master of unlife, and the strongest of all undead. Repent the folly of stepping into my domain. The result was always the same no matter who approached, be it adventurer or traitor, all had fallen before his might and only existed to fuel his growth. What will he do now? Will he shout his intent to rid the world of my evil? Or will he try to negotiate for his life? Those are always my favorites. Pleading with the undead? How foolish! While he had seemingly heard every type of response known to man, what was said next were completely outside the realm of his expectations. You shitty devs, what? That response was so far from his assumptions that he could only stare in shock for a moment. Honestly, he didn't even know what he had said. For instance, what were these devs? Of course, just making tons of unfair game design wasn't enough for you, was it? You just had to make starting out a pain as well, huh? Well, fine, I see how it is. I've got quite the strongly worded email for you when I leave here. As the creature began to ramble about things he couldn't even understand, it seemed to pick up a stone from the ground for whatever reason and began to talk again. What are you saying? Just fend for yourself with whatever lying around. Fine, I can beat a giant dragon with a stone, watch. And with that he tossed the piece of rubble straight at him. He's delusional. For one, he had been talking nonsense the entire time as if not paying attention to the main point of interest, himself, this entire time. Either he was already crazy, or his fear had caused him to lose his mind. The second was the preposterous idea that a mere pebble would cause him harm. It merely flew a few feet in the air before falling harmlessly to the ground, allowing him to get a clear shot and subsequently devour its soul. At least, that's how it should have gone. Instead, the rock flew through the air faster than the eye could see, and smashed into the side of his head with the force of a warhammer. The sudden shock caused him to roar in pain while stumbling backwards. Part of his skull had been reduced to fragments after that strike, leaving a billowing smoke to escape from the openings. He was losing energy, and fast. I need to retreat and restore my energy before I die here. He no longer cared about the creature that attacked him. Clearly it was stronger than he could imagine. He was smart, nothing would matter if he died, he just needed to rest, and return to his cave to restore what he had lost. And with that, he burrowed into the ground, the fear of death still fresh in his mind, and with a new object of his ire. That was all Pararon could think after that had gone down. He had expected himself to die there, so he was acting all sarcastic before he did, since it was all he could think of at the time, but in the end, the opposite of what he was expecting had occurred. His strike had grievously wounded his opponent. While it was true that such arm strength was possible, that was only the case if he was. Am I still level 100? Certainly that would explain the events that had just occurred, but if that was the case, why? Yggdrasil shut down, so how could he retain his character? I'll just check the menu then. What? However, as he went to motion for his UI, he soon realized that it was non-existent. Even his health bar and map were no longer there. What the hell is going on? He was beginning to panic at this sudden revelation. And the more he was realizing that things were not normal, the more he began to notice. For instance, why could he feel the breeze blowing against his feathers? Why was the chill in the air so biting? Why was no way. Had he been transferred into Yggdrasil? That couldn't be the case, could it? It's simply impossible. But if it was, then what was here with him? As he now tried to familiarize himself with his surroundings, he found that he was extremely high up in the mountains. Thus he activated a skill which could only be taken by a birdman who had taken points in archer classes, Eagle Eye. This skill allowed him to see 5 kilometers out, and even possessed an optional crosshair for him to use as he saw fit. The land around him was seemingly just as barren. Snow-filled mountains made up the majority of his vision, with nothing that would signify any sort of life. As he was beginning to lose hope, he spotted a fortress near a large crack in the ground, inhabited by what seemed to be very short people. Aren't those dwarves? Dwarves were certainly a race in Yggdrasil, and what he saw here certainly fit the description. With their stout bodies and long beards, it would be the image anyone would think of when they heard the word dwarf. Suddenly, a flash of inspiration soon hit his mind as he began to realize the implications of his situation. If I'm really in Yggdrasil, doesn't that mean that races like succubi, sirens, and all other kinds of women are real now? Is my fantasy finally a reality? Is this heaven? Oi, dumbass brother of mine. What exactly are you looking at? Or not? And this one took me a bit to figure out where I wanted to go from, but I got an idea for it just in time. Hope you all who celebrated had a great Thanksgiving, and I hope you men of culture enjoy that number, winky face. Chapter 17. Hearing that all too familiar voice had snapped him out of the dreamscape he had been envisioning himself in and instead gave him a mixture of emotions that could be narrowed down to happiness and displeasure. Happiness because she was here with him and displeasure because she was here with him. Why are you immediately accusing me of stuff when I'm just trying to get my bearings? You're probably just as confused as I am right now, so what's the big deal? The problem is, as you may know, dear brother, slime see-through vibrations in the air instead of sight, and I'm noticing an awful lot of vibrations around your lower half, so care to explain what you were looking at? Shit. And now's not the time for that sort of thing. Like I said, we need to get our bearings, since we have just been thrown into a fantasy world due to some unknown phenomenon, so we should focus on finding our way around. Nice excuse. Well, you're right, so I'll let you off the hook this time. And speaking of, what even happened to cause this? Last I remember, you were in the VR set, then when I went to grab it, everything went dark, and now we're here. Pararon began to recant his side of the events, from him seeing Yggdrasil's icon in the games he had, him clicking on it, to the sudden appearance of the dragon. This explanation prompted a scoff from Buku Chagama. Figures that you would be the one to cause all this to happen. Can you never just do anything right, Unai-chan? What? You're blaming me for this mess? How am I supposed to know that the isekai genre went from fiction to based on a true story? All I did was click on the icon out of curiosity. It's your own fault for being here because you tried to grab it when I rightfully had it. Are you serious? You're pinning it on me now. And so the once empty, silent wasteland of the dead became filled with the sounds of pointless arguing that seemed liable to wake the corpses from their eternal slumber. Yet after some time, the incessant bickering finally began to die down for now, and the emergence of actual conversation could be heard. Well, we'll continue this later. For now we need to find a way to get out of here. And I think I know just where to go. Do you? And how would you know that? As it would happen, ye of little faith, when you had disturbed me earlier, I was looking around for some signs of civilization in this area, and as it would happen, I found it. Over in that direction about 3 kilometers, there was a fortress of some kind, and with it was a group of dwarves. The slime merely turned slowly towards him, and with a mocking face, probably, said, "You know I can't see that far outright. Whatever, just trust me on this, okay? Well, just head down there and ask some question on where we are, alright? While I don't know how I feel in entrusting you, it seems we don't have any other option right now. Fine, let's go. You really need to lay off the insults, you know that. Why?" And so the air once again ignited with the heat of their spat, which would continue for the entirety of their walk to the fortress. Looks like I win again. The dwarf who had shouted that was one of the many troops garrisoned at the fortress outside the city of Fiojera. Since rarely any action was seen nowadays, many of the soldiers found themselves getting bored with the large amount of standby time. The Quigoa had been dealt with, though they would never have attacked in the daylight anyways. The beast usually stuck to the forest, and most nations did not know of its location. So it was rare the dwarves would ever need to actually battle. Though there was another reason for this. It's a little suspicious that this is now the 3rd time you've won in a row, Arain. Are you sure you're not cheating? I think you're just mixing up cheating with skill. Now pay up. The dwarves all around him somewhat begrudgingly gave their bets to the winner of the game they had just lost at. While he had said he hadn't been cheating, he was only partially telling the truth. He was using a little-known technique known as card counting to win, though there was no need to tell them that. Man, and I was hoping to get a drink after work too. Sigh, better hold off then. Though I don't even know if this can even be considered work with those fellas up here. His thumb jerked back to the walls of the fortress at 2 beings that seemed to be large in every possible meaning of the word. These were in fact undead loaned to them by the Sorcerer Kingdom. Whatever issues somehow managed to pop up, they could take care of with ease. They would take a stance whenever something approached the garrison, which had them double as sentries for the dwarves. So that meant that all the dwarves stationed here could relax and wait until something did happen to show up. I know, right? Who knew that creatures of such strength could be controlled? They're just so damn strong. Remember when the Phoenix Lord came down and spotted us? Though we were done for. Yeah, how could we forget? Who knows what would have happened otherwise? The incident in question happened a few weeks prior. One of the rulers of Mt. Rapasli, its power was considered one of the greatest in the Azerlizia mountain range. Though it rarely comes down this low, it must have been looking for prey due to a shortage. While the dwarves quickly fell into panic and were ready to die then and there, the two undead had managed to fend off the creature and caused it to flee back into the mountains. From then on, nobody questioned their power. Well, regardless, it's all thanks to the Sorcerer Kingdom for that. I've actually been saving up to take a trip there, as I hear their food is just delicious. And after this game, it looks like I have enough. Wow, lucky you. Looks like you worked real hard to save up that much. The dwarf simply flashed his friend a grin as they began to set up the cards once more. However, before they could finish, the distinct sound of metal clattering could be heard. That had meant that the undead had spotted something. While they would be fine with staying down here since they were confident that they could deal with anything, they still needed to verify if it was a traveler and let them through. Well, I guess I'll see what's got them all riled up this time. Don't start without me. Then don't take too long. With that, he began to ascend the steps of the tower to see who the unannounced visitor was. While there was a scheduled drop-off of goods today from the Sorcerer Kingdom, the undead would not have acted, so it must be something else. What could it be this time? As he looked over the balcony, he had seen the people in question. While the Sorcerer Kingdom had accepted a large amount of species into its fold, many who lived outside its walls were not used to seeing them. So there was still a bit of shock that was present to outsiders. After seeing the two, the first thing he had though was confusion. While they had no weapons and were alone, that was not enough to curb his suspicion. For one of the entities was a slime. These creatures were known to be non-intelligent, basically acting on instinct. While there was a wide variety of them, such as fiber-eating slimes and sewer slimes, none had ever grown to be larger than large rocks other than particularly noteworthy individuals such as kings. But this one appeared to be the size of a human, or even a bit taller. The other one appeared to be some kind of birdman. While it was not unpleasant to look at, it seemed to radiate an air of beauty despite not doing anything due to its coloration. It was a mixture of gold and white, with long black hair. At first glance, it seemed to be intelligent given the way it was moving. Was the slime some kind of utility creature for the road or? Excuse me, Dwarf-san? My name is Pararon, and this is Buku Buku Chagama. It would seem we have gotten a bit lost in the mountains. Could you please tell us where we are at present? It would be a great help. So that's the story. If directions was all they needed, then he could happily assist them. This is the stronghold outside the city of Fiojera. If you're looking for directions back to a city, then the closest place would probably be the Sorcerer Kingdom to the south. If you are willing to travel a ways more though, the Empire is a bit further out in the east. I see. Well, we had run out of supplies recently, so would it be possible for us to enter the city to restock? Pretty please. The one who had said that was the slime, which had come as a huge shock. Not only the fact that it was intelligent, but the high-pitched voice was so far from his expectations for the monster, that he was stunned for a few seconds. Once he regained his composure, he answered them as best he could. Well, I'd have to check with the others, but if there seems to be no problems, then sure. With that, he went back to inform the dwarves of the new arrivals, hearing a muffled "So you were staring at them? I didn't realize you swung that way," which was followed by some kind of retort most likely. When he reached the room and informed them of the visitors, surprise filled their faces as he told them who was there, but a general consensus had been reached. He went back up to notify them of the arrangement with a few others in tow. While would be more than happy to accommodate you, you're unknown to us all, so in exchange for passage, could we ask a favor from you? What would that be? In an hour from now, the Flat-Chest Vampire Airlines is scheduled to drop off some goods here, so could we ask you to help us transport them down to Fiojera with us? The other party had stood still and silent for a length of time after that. While it was not long enough to warrant a repeat of the question, it was still long enough that brought about uncomfortable awkwardness. Yet the silence was soon broken with another question. The what? Yes. It's relatively new. So I don't think you would have heard of it, but we have recently begun trade with the Sorcerer Kingdom, and they utilize frost dragons to carry the goods between nations. It's actually quite ingenious when you think about it. They can't be robbed because the dragons can fend for themselves and would scare of thieves, and traveling by the air means they can make it here in extremely short time. It's great. That's not what. Never mind. We'd be happy to help. While he could sense they still had something on their mind, he chose to ignore it for now, as he had no need to pry deeper. Since they had agreed to cooperate, they had held to their side of the deal and opened the gate. Though with that came a new type of caution, as they had walked past the undead without so much as a glance. That either meant that they had seen them before, or they could handle them in a fight. While he did not think that the latter was a possibility, he had filed it away in his mind as a precaution. Soon enough, the pair had walked with them all into the landing zone. Since they had some time to spare, they had decided to pass the time with the newcomers. Well, since it will most likely be a while before the supply drop is here, why don't we have a card game while we wait? I'm down. How about you, Chagama? I'm fine with it. It beats waiting around doing nothing. Then it's settled. Though I warn you I'm pretty good. I haven't lost a match all day. The taunt seemingly fell on deaf ears, as the avian merely responded with, then I guess I'll just have to take that title from you. Though he could not read its expressions well, it most likely had a smug look. Now challenged, the game was set in motion, and by the end of it, he had made do on his promise and had managed to beat the dwarf, much to his chagrin. Even though he had found a technique to win games easily, Pararon seemed to find a way around it. Well, it looks like I've won. How did you manage to do that anyhow? He's been beating us all day, but you just came in and defeated us all like it was nothing. Well, it's a little trick I've learned called card counting. You simply assign a card with a value, like a number, and keep tabs on how many have been taken from the pile already, and use the values to learn what the other players have based on what is left from your calculations. It's not cheating as it takes skill, but it gives you quite the advantage. Ah, so you knew about that method too then. Realizing what he just admitted to, he soon found glares from the dwarves that were present being directed at him, now knowing how he had won all those times. Anyhow, it seems that the dragons are in view. Looks like the supplies have arrived. Sure enough, it would seem that a flight of 5 different dragons was making their way to the fortress. Each one seemed to be carrying a large amount of crates and other assorted fare. As they landed, their imposing frame became all the more clearer, with the one exception being a dragon who had tiny glasses on his snout, with a large amount of fat on his body. While it may appear humorous, it was still one of the strongest species in the world, so its looks did not matter much. Well now, since the supplies and food have arrived, let's get to work bringing them down to the city. Since Pararon had promised them that he would assist in carrying the supplies, he happily obliged. Since he was of quite a high level, his arm strength was more than sufficient to make this menial task child's play. The dwarves around him expressed shock at how easily he was able to carry the large boxes that would have normally needed to be unpacked, then taken out individually. However, as they began to head for the large crack in the mountain, a loud, bell-like voice rang forth. Pararon Sama. Shocked at the sudden development, he had turned around to see who had said such a thing, and when he did, his blood turned to ice. Standing by the dragons was a short, petite girl. Her eyes seemed to glow a deep crimson, and silver hair that gleamed in the sun descended from her headdress. Her outfit seemed to be a very deep purple with white frills outlining it, and appeared to be a gown of some sort. And finally, her face was a pale white, and seemed to be the incarnation of beauty. But despite all of this, none of it surprised him, for he had already seen her before. Indeed, as he had made her back in Yggdrasil. Hey Pararon, isn't that? He wasn't able to hear the rest of her sentence, as he soon passed out from the overwhelming emotions that had consumed him. And in case you didn't know, Maruyama stated that if Pero ever saw Shaltir, he would faint in agony. He says a lot of things. Like how in 100 years, Aura will have enormous breast that will make Shaltir despair. Hope there is an epilogue in the last book that details what happens then. Welcome back guys to What If Ainz Guildmates Transfer to New World Part 10. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications by hitting the bell icon, like and share this video. Let's get started. Chapter 16. The world of 2138 was a bleak one. Many had lost hope for the future with one look at the decrepit world they found themselves in. Smog covered the majority of the world, making the air practically unbreathable, and any spots that were clear of contaminants were seen as luxury tourist traps, and cost so much that an average person